Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. This recording is all about how to use noun clauses in academic writing. This is intended for my classes of AEIS 110. If you're watching this from some other class or for some other purpose, I hope that it proves to be useful to you. Alright, well, let's get started here. So we're talking about noun clauses. And, obviously, these are clauses which can be used as nouns. Duh! Now, let's think about what that really means, though. For something to be used as a noun, it has to be able to serve as a subject, an object of a preposition, and it also has to be able to be replaced by a pronoun. That means replacing something with a word like it. So let's take a look at a few examples right here. Here's the first one. What I want to tell you is very important. Okay, the noun clause right here actually starts at the very beginning. Here it is. What I want to tell you. This actually serves as the subject of the sentence. I know it's the subject because this verb right after it is actually conjugated in the third singular, telling me that whatever came right here has to be acting as the subject. I also know that it's acting as the subject and that it is a noun because I can do this. It is very important. I can actually replace that whole noun clause right there with one pronoun. That tells me that it's acting as a noun. Let's come down to the next one. He told me that he wanted to show me something important. Okay, the noun clause in this case starts with the word that. Same deal here. We're actually acting as the object in this sentence. So this noun clause functions as an object. Again, I could try to replace it by saying, he told me it. Now that sounds a little bit weird, right? But we could say something else like, he told me that. Or he told me that particular rumor, whatever the case might be. Regardless, essentially what we've got there is a clause that's acting as the object in the sentence. So it's a noun clause. Then we end up with this case right here. I don't really remember whether I went there or not. This is another common type of noun clause. Whether I went there or not. It's functioning as the object in the sentence. Again, I could replace it with it. I don't really remember it. Instead, what we have is a full clause right there. So there you go. One last example here. In describing what he observed that night, he was also remembering what he had hoped to forget. Hopefully, if you look at this right here, and then compare it to both this and this. Whoops, okay. Unfortunately, it didn't want me to highlight both of those. I can do that again, though. There we go. If you look at both of those and compare them to what we saw up here, you'll notice it's almost exactly the same form. The difference is, in this first one right here, it's acting as the subject of the sentence. Looking down here, in describing what he observed that night, we actually have things functioning as objects, describing something. Here's the thing right here, an object. What he observed that night. Next item, he was also remembering what he had hoped to forget. Again, acting as the object, just like we saw right up here. Okay, well great, there we go. Now we've got some noun clauses, we got the idea of what they are. Let's really focus in on this question of like, why in the heck should you care? Well, this is actually pretty important in academic writing. Noun clauses are very commonly used in academic writing for three really important purposes. The first one is reported speech. Now, reported speech means saying what someone else said. What someone else thought, what someone else said, what someone else stated, etc. We use it very commonly for that, especially in citations. We also use it to establish unknown topics for analysis. Here's what that means. We'll bring up a new topic, some idea that we're actually going to talk about quite a bit later on. In the following sentences. And finally, expressing doubt. Now here's one example of it already, whether I went there or not. That's the most common way that we talk about doubt, using whether or by using if. So we've got those three functions right here, reported speech, establishing unknown topics for analysis, and expressing doubt. And we're going to look into those a bit more as this video goes on. Here's the big thing. If you can't use noun clauses correctly, you will end up making lots of mistakes in your writing because you have to use them all the time. I'm not just making this up. If we look at academic writing, you see noun clauses all over the place. Most commonly because we have to talk about research findings and various other things. We have to talk about the research that we've done too, and where we got our information from. So if you can't use these correctly, it's really going to put an ice pick in your grade. Here's a couple of important things to remember about noun clauses. First of all, they're usually the object of the sentence, and that's different from when we're talking. Noun clauses are often subjects when we talk. If we go back up here, notice, what I want to tell you is very important. That sounds more like something that you would either read in a novel or something that you would hear when someone is speaking. It's not something that you read in academic writing very much. In academic writing, the noun clause is going to be the object of the sentence, just like what we see in these three examples here. Okay, that's one thing to remember. Another thing to remember, noun clauses most often begin with the word that. This is important because there's a lot of things that begin with that. The two most common are noun clauses and adjective clauses. So we have to be aware of the fact that there's more than one thing that can start with that. The most commonly used type of noun clause is definitely going to be a that clause for reporting speech. We'll look at that in a little bit here. When you're expressing doubt or new topics, noun clauses usually start with a WH word. When we say WH word, that means what, who, when, where, why. It also means how as well. This also means whether, and it also includes the word if. So, once again, in the case of doubt, noun clauses often begin with whether or if. This is what we talked about before. And if you look at one of the examples we had right up here at the beginning, whether I went there or not, we're talking about not really trusting our memory, not really knowing what happened. So again, if it's the idea of doubt, it oftentimes starts with whether or if. Okay, here's one nifty little trick. The great majority of noun clauses come after three verbs, and those verbs are think, know, and say. So the noun clause will function as the object of these three verbs. In fact, this accounts for about 80%, that's 80% of all the noun clauses we use in English. The nice thing about this is it means that you can also use noun clauses, the typical kinds of noun clauses, after synonyms of these words and similar words. And that's what good academic writers do. So if we say wonder, consider, opine, that's the verb form of opinion, discover, decide, those are all very similar to using think. And instead of saying know, you could say be sure, be aware, be certain, believe. These are all things that we could say instead there. Instead of say, you can say state, report, claim. Those are all fairly common words that you're going to hear in academic writing. But basically, it's these three functions, thinking, knowing, and saying. And that's going to account for about 80% of all the noun clauses you use. So here's some examples of the most common forms of these. Here's one. Scientists currently think that the world is round. Well, here's think, right? Think. And now, right after that, we have this that the world is round. This acts as the object of the verb think. There we go. Let's take a look at another one. Although people think, here's another think, that they are familiar with our own languages. Okay, there we go. We have think, and now we have that plus an actual sentence after it, acting as the object in the sentence. In reality, most humans do not know, and here we have this know, like we were talking about before, how language works or why we all seem to be experts in it. So, same thing, do not know, and then here's our object of the sentence. Now notice right here when we have this know, it's actually in the negative, do not know. We're going to talk about that in a second here too. Here's another one. In a recent survey, students reported, so we've got reported, just like say. We could say students said that homework was their least favorite activity. Instead we said reported right here. And once again, we've got a noun clause right here, acting as the object in the sentence. And we could also do this. They also stated, so same thing, stated, reported, both synonyms of say. They also stated that water is wet and the sky is blue. Yeah, we all hate homework. We know it. And again, this is acting as the object in the sentence. Okay, so that's the basics right there of where we're going to find noun clauses most commonly. They're going to be the object in the sentence, and they're typically going to come after the verbs think, say, and know. Well, let's get into some of the specific types here. Now, you might have noticed so far that most of them start with that, but every now and then we have one of these WH words in front. Okay, well, let's divide them in two. Because when we use that, this first one right here, it's got its own functions. And when we use WH words, well, those have their own specific functions too. So let's just look at them in order. We'll start with that. So the most common type of noun clause starts with that. And this is the type that's most commonly used for reported speech. It's really, really easy to use, which is why basically after this part of the video, if you want, you can just stop it and you'll be okay for most of the noun clauses that you'll ever use in academic writing. You'll still want to keep going if you want to figure out the rest of it, but really if you just do this part, you're done. Okay, so here's the form. We end up with subject plus verb or adjective predicate. Don't worry if you don't know what an adjective predicate means. Basically, it just means like the to be verb plus an adjective, right? Like be smart, be tall, be happy, whatever else the case might be, right? That's what an adjective predicate is. Now we might, that's what this means when we have parentheses here, we might have a recipient in there. We don't have to necessarily. And then we'd have that, and then we have a sentence. Okay, well, that's a nice little form and everything right there. That tells us nothing. Let's see some actual examples of that. Here we go. He said that he wanted to stop working on grammar. Okay, let's break this apart. First, we have to have a subject. Well, here it is, he. Then we need to have some sort of a verb. Well, here it is, say. And just like we said before, that's one of those three verbs that's going to be most common. After that, we could have a recipient. I don't see a recipient in here. That's because we're using the verb said. On the other hand, if I changed this to tell, okay, I'll have to put it into the past tense because we had said before, all right? So he told. Whoops, this doesn't work now. I have to have a recipient. I can say him now. The reason I have to have a recipient is because when I have the verb tell, I have to have some sort of recipient after it. He told him, he told me, he told her, whatever the case might be. Okay. So anyhow, we have here our subject, here's our verb, here's our recipient. Now we need to have that. Boom, here it is. And finally, a full sentence. And when we say a full sentence, we're talking about any sentence you can think of, really. It doesn't have to be one clause. It doesn't have to be a simple sentence. It can be a complex sentence that you put in there. As soon as you've put that in, basically anything you want to put after it is okay. And what we have here is he wanted to stop working on grammar. One simple sentence after this. I could change it quite easily and make it a more complicated sentence, right? In fact, let's do that. Let's add a subordinate clause into the beginning. I'm going to start it with although. Although he loved the language. So I can do this. I have this that, boom, and now right after it, here's a subordinate clause. Although he loved the language. Okay, so we've got this subordinate adverb clause, and now we have an independent clause after it. He wanted to stop working on grammar. I can do that quite easily. It doesn't have to be a simple sentence after that. Okay, let's take a look at another example. She told him that he still needed to work on grammar anyway. Aha! Just like we saw before, we have tell. And when we have tell, we need a recipient, right? Now, I said she told him. Well, let's change that. I could get rid of the recipient by saying she said. And there we go. She said that he still needed to work on grammar anyway. Same deal. We've got subject, verb, and here is our that, and here's our sentence right after it. Boom. Next up, experts currently are fairly sure that, whoa, hold up, something's different here, right? Something is definitely different. Okay, I see a subject, right? Experts, great. Currently, so we have a little adverb that we've tossed in there to change things up. Okay, we can do that, not a problem. Are fairly sure. Well, here's our verb, but then we get this fairly sure, and then we get that. That's what we were talking about before. This is an adjective predicate. That's all it is. When we say adjective predicate, we're just talking about the to be verb plus an adjective that comes after it. And in this case, you notice we've put an adverb in front of the adjective. And that's fine too. Fairly sure, fairly certain, fairly happy, whatever else the case might be. I've got that adjective predicate. Now after that comes our that, and after that, here's our sentence. Boom, all done. All right, so that's the most common way that you should use that in order to create noun clauses. There's another way that we can do this, though. What we've just looked at basically is reported speech. You know, this is what people say, this is what people think, right? However, we can use the same thing to actually talk about the conclusion we're drawing about something. We can use this when we're trying to prove something. This is really common in academic writing after you've talked about evidence. So if you've presented some statistics, if you've presented some stories, a history of a particular thing, and you want to show how that proves your main point, well, you're going to use the same type of grammar. And it's going to look like this. Same deal, subject, plus one of these verbs. Notice I've listed 4 verbs right here. Show, prove, mean, and demonstrate. And they need to be conjugated appropriately. Put them into the right tense, make sure they match for person, right, and number. And then after that, we get that and a sentence. And that's basically it. That's all we have to do. Here's a couple of examples that are very common in academic writing. Here we go. This shows that public investment in certain goods can benefit the whole of society. Okay, a lot of big words in there, but let's break this into pieces. Here's our subject, this, okay? And since this is academic writing, this refers to some sort of idea, statistic, whatever the case might be, that came previously somewhere back up here in the paper. So that's our subject, and here's our verb. We chose to use show. Now we conjugate it correctly, shows, because it's this, which is third singular. That takes an S, okay? This shows, now we've got our that, okay? And now the whole rest of this is just a sentence. Public investment in certain goods can benefit the whole of society. Great. Here's another one. These data, okay, here's our subject. These data. What data? What are we talking about here? Once again, just like we saw with this right here, we've got a these right here, and that tells us we're talking about something that was already presented back up here somewhere in the paper. So these data, obviously whoever wrote this was talking about some particular pieces of information earlier in the paper. Okay, so here's our subject, and here's our verb. Demonstrate. We say demonstrate because we've got a plural subject right here. Okay, these data demonstrate that, and here's our that, right? Now, we've got, this is interesting right here, we actually have a complex sentence. It starts off with while, right? We've got while some cases of cheating are intentional, the great majority arise from a lack of understanding. Boom. So here we have a subordinate clause in the beginning. And right here we have the main clause. All right. So basically, it's just like what we were looking at before. You know, we have a subject, verb, that, plus a sentence. The only difference here is this. We have a subject here plus a specific verb. It's going to be one of these 4, show, prove, mean, or demonstrate. We're not going to use an adjective typically here. It's not going to be an adjective predicate like what we saw up here, right? Okay, so we've got those. That's basically what we need to know. There's one more way that we can use a that, though, and it really involves this adjective predicate idea. This is actually really cool, though, because what you can do is use a that clause to state a commonly held belief, some fact that you think everybody knows, that everybody knows about, that we all know, whatever the case might be. And that's one of the most common types of mistakes that I see in student writings. People like to say, we all know, or everybody knows, or as we all know, right? Well, we don't like to see that in academic writing. Instead of that, what we can do is this. So here's our form. It is plus an adjective or a passive verb. Now when I say adjective here, we're talking about an adjective, well, it is an adjective predicate, but the is back here. So just think of it as we put an adjective in. Or we could use a passive verb. Then we have that plus a full sentence. Now the reason this is cool is because the subject here is it. And that's what we call in linguistics a pleonastic pronoun. Pleonastic just means it doesn't mean anything on its own. It's there because it has to be. We have to have a subject for the sentence, but really what we're doing is just making this idea right here relate to whatever verb or adjective we've got right here. Does that sound confusing? It should. Let me show you what I mean, and it's going to seem really easy. Here we go. It is clear that rain will cause plants to grow more than drought. Basically what we're saying right here is, okay, here we've got our that clause, right? That rain will cause plants to grow more than drought. Okay, does that sound confusing? Rain. When it's raining, you know, rain coming from the sky, right? Drought means there's no water anywhere, all right? Rain will cause plants to grow more than drought. Well, yeah, that's pretty clear. That's pretty obvious, right? Everybody knows that, right? But I don't want to say everybody knows that rain will cause plants to grow more than drought. So instead I've got this. It is, so here's the first part. Then we've got clear. Clear, obvious, right? It is clear that this is the case. Now, the reason we're doing this is because I could take this noun clause right here and I could make it the subject of the sentence. I could change it around so it looks like this. I'll make this capital. I'll get rid of all this. And what I do is I just basically come to the end and say, that rain will cause plants to grow more than drought is clear. That's really weird sounding, though. We don't like to do that very much. Like I said before, we like to have noun clauses as objects, but not as subjects in academic writing. So, what we end up with is this construction with it is plus an adjective and then that noun clause so that it's not the subject in this case. This is very commonly used. It's extremely common, and it's a way to avoid using some subject like we or you or everybody knows. Instead of that, we just get it is plus that adjective, and then we keep going. Okay, here's another example. It is believed. There we go. Here is the passive verb instead of the adjective in there. It is believed that eating a dictionary can increase a person's vocabulary. I hope you don't believe that, but I know there's some people out there who do. It's the same deal. We've got this it is. Who's the it right here? Who the heck knows? Everybody, you, we, whatever the case might be. Regardless, though, we've eliminated any nasty subject that we're not supposed to use in academic writing. Okay, let's move on to the next type here. We've just looked at everything that we can do with a that. Let's look at what we can do with a WH word. So WH words usually start noun clauses that are introducing an unknown topic. And what that means is something that will be elaborated later, or a point of doubt or uncertainty. Okay, now this sounds weird, right? An unknown topic, something that will be elaborated later. Basically what we're saying right here is you're mentioning something, and whenever you say it, we know that you're going to tell us more about it later. Kind of like if you're talking to a friend, and you say to your friend, hey, dude, I just saw this movie yesterday. And they say, yeah? Because they know that you're going to tell them more about it. In fact, if you say, dude, I saw this movie yesterday, and they go, yeah? And you say, yep. And that's it. They would feel very strange, right? That's basically how we use these noun clauses with WH words. They tell us something that we're going to say more about later on. The other thing that they do is they talk about doubt or uncertainty. And if we look at them, there's two main types. Just like we talked about earlier, there are normal WH words, so who, what, where, when, why, how, and then there's whether/if right here. These ones talk about doubt. These ones normally talk about topic. So let's take a look at them. Normally, WH words. The first thing that you're going to see is behind this word no, along with don't. So I'm calling this don't know because, like we looked at earlier, there's 3 words that account for 80% of all noun clauses in English. Know, say, and think. Now the thing is, when you're using know, it's most commonly in the negative. So this is what we got here. They're most commonly used with the verb know, as well as the adjective predicates, like we talked about before, of be aware, be sure, and be certain. And they're most commonly in the negative. So here's how that looks. It's going to be like subject plus some sort of negation, could be do not or are not. Do not if it's a verb, keep that in mind, do goes with verbs. Are not if it's an adjective, are goes with adjectives. That could be is not too, right? Basically, to do goes with verbs, to be goes with adjectives. After that, we get our verb or adjective. Then we get our WH word. And then we get our clause. Now, I said clause right here. I didn't say sentence. The reason I didn't say sentence is because the reason we have a WH word here is because it substitutes for some part of the clause that comes after it. I'll say that again. The WH word substitutes for some piece of the clause that comes after it. Now, do you understand what that means? My guess is probably not. Let's take a look at it. Here we go. Here's one example. Subject, he, okay? Now we've got does. So we're negating it with does, so I know there's going to be a verb after it, okay? Does not, okay, here we go. Does not know, boom. Okay, he does not know, and now we get why. So that's our WH word, why. He does not know why she left so early. All right, now this is a hard example to use because I said this WH word substitutes for some piece of the clause over here. In this case, we've got why. Why is really asking for an answer of because, right? She left the party so early because, but well, why? And that's what this why is doing right here. It's acting as an adverb phrase that's been left out of this clause. Let's take a look at another one. This is going to be easier to understand. All right, so here we start. She, great, that's our subject, is not sure. Aha, so here's that is not, are not, etc. that we've got right there. Is not sure. So we've got an adjective predicate here. Now we've got our WH word, what. Okay, so there's our WH word, and our clause after it is this. He is going to make for dinner. Now look at that really quick like. He is going to make for dinner. He is going to make what for dinner? Aha, that's what our what is doing. Normally, we would have to have some sort of object right here after the verb make. Instead, we've taken that out and we've put it right here at the beginning of the noun clause. That's what I mean when I say the WH word substitutes for some part of the clause. The part that's missing of this clause is the object, and that object is the WH word right here. Okay, here's another example. Most experts are not certain. So here's the same deal right here. We have an adjective predicate. We have here our subject. Now we have our WH word, why. And now we have the rest of the clause right there. Okay, and that's basically how we use normal WH words. You notice in each case we have does not know, is not sure, are not certain. We've got the don't know right there. That's all of these, they're negative, they're expressing a lack of knowledge about something. Okay, here's another way to use them. Instead of don't know, now we're talking about topic. And like I was saying earlier, this means something that's going to be elaborated later, something that you're going to talk about more, right? It looks almost exactly the same as before, but the usage is a little bit different. It's usually going to be positive, not negative. So let's take a look at what that means. Okay, here we go with the form. Starts off with a subject, great, then a verb, some sort of just verb right there, and now we've got a WH word plus a clause. Now notice, it's a subject plus a verb, not an adjective predicate. It's going to be a verb, most typically. Okay, let's look at how that works. Well, we've got the first one down here. Scientists have finally decided what they want to call the new element. All right, so we have here our subject, scientists, and we have finally decided. That whole thing is our verb phrase. Notice we've got have decided. That just means that it's in the present perfect, that's all. It's still the verb, and the verb here is decide. Okay, scientists have finally decided what, so there's our WH word right there, what they want to call the new element. And same thing as before, this WH word provides, it substitutes rather, for some piece of this clause right here. What they want to call the new element. Well, if we just look at the clause, they want to call the new element, well, we're missing the name right here, right? What do they want to call it? What do they want to call it? Well, here's what the what is substituting for. All right. Next up. Some people have already chosen, so here's our subject, some people have already chosen where they want to go during their vacation time. Same deal. We've got our WH word, and here we've got the rest of the clause. They want to go during their vacation time. We've got this go. It's like, well, they want to go where, you know, or when. So this where right here is actually expressing an adverb phrase that should be inside that clause right there. Okay. Same deal right here. Here is another one. These ideas are what this paper will focus on in more detail. All right, and notice we've got this little adverb right here. But same deal. We've got subject, verb, and then WH word plus the rest of the clause. Okay, so that's establishing a topic. If we think about this, scientists have finally decided what they want to call the new element. We're not just going to leave it at that. That's a cliffhanger right there. We need to say what the scientists are actually going to call it. In a following sentence, we're probably going to see something like, they have decided to call the element unobtainium, or whatever else the case might be. Same case. Some people have already chosen where they want to go during their vacation time. Well, in another sentence that comes right after this, I'm probably going to say, many of them have decided to go to Mexico, while some have decided to remain in the United States but go to other places. I need to elaborate. I need to talk more about what exactly they've decided to do, where they've decided to go. All right. Let's come down and talk about the next part here. We've just talked about all the ways that we can use normal WH words. There's two of them. We usually use them for don't know and establishing a topic. All right, now we come down here, and we've got whether and if. This is actually fairly common. We use these a little bit more than the WH words in academic writing. The reason is because basically they have a specific function that we like to use quite a bit in academic writing, and that is to express a doubt about something. It's really useful if we're trying to establish some sort of contrast or call into question some sort of commonly believed or established idea. So something everybody thinks is true, something everybody's already sure that, yeah, you know, this is absolutely the way it is. Well, we can use these types of noun clauses to question that. Now, this appears in the negative quite often, and it usually occurs together with don't know, are not sure, are not certain, are not clear about. But there's one case where it's used in the positive, and it's just with this one verb, question. Now notice this, question could be a noun, it could be a verb. In this case, we're using it as a verb. And question goes together very well with whether or if. It stays in the positive. Most other verbs go into the negative when you're using whether or if. All right, so let's take a look at three common forms, really quick like here. So for form number one is we get our subject plus a negative verb, and again, that's going to be one of these guys, right? Do not know, are not sure, are not certain, are not clear about. And again, I say are and I say do. You have to conjugate things appropriately in each situation. So regardless, we have subject, negative verb, plus whether or not, that phrase altogether, plus a sentence that comes after it. Another way of doing it, subject plus negative verb, exactly the same so far, plus whether, or we could also choose if. Either one. We can't put both of them together, but I could choose either one. And then we could put a sentence after it, and we can add or not afterwards. We don't have to, but we can. The last one, I can put a subject right here, and then the verb question. Now, like I said here, you have to conjugate it appropriately, right? So put it into the correct tense, make sure you match it for person, number, all that kind of stuff, right? And then we get whether or if, one or the other, not both, plus a sentence, and then we can, if we want to, say or not afterwards. All right, let's take a look at some examples here. So for the first form, we got our subject here. Teachers, all right, then we get a negative verb, just like we saw up there. Teachers are not sure. Okay, so subject plus negative verb, good. Now we get whether or not. Whether or not, plagiarism actually means the same thing to both them and their students. So what we're talking about here is teachers not knowing if something is true or if it is not true, right? And this is the thing that they're unsure about, this idea right here, right? So we end up with that. Here's another one. Students, however, often do not know if their identification of plagiarism actually applies in scholastic contexts or not. This is what we had before, right? I have this little or not that I can put on the end. So if I want to put it there, I just get rid of these parentheses, boom, and now it's part of the sentence. If I don't want it there, Boom, I don't have to have it there. I can get rid of it. It doesn't really matter. So same deal. Here's our subject, students. Here is our verb, do not know, okay? And now we use if. We used if, we haven't used whether. I could quite easily get rid of if and instead put in whether. It's going to be the same meaning, doesn't change anything. Students, however, often do not know whether their definition of plagiarism actually applies in scholastic contexts. Same deal. Now, last one. Here we've got question, just like we looked at up here. Right? However, recently, many experts have questioned. So here's our subject. Many experts have questioned. So again, we've conjugated it appropriately. Many experts have questioned, and now we've got our whether. Whether the idea of plagiarism is actually something which needs to be discussed at all. And if I wanted to, you notice we have this or not, I could put or not at the end of this. Since it's a really long sentence, it sounds kind of weird to put it at the end, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And that is basically how we use whether or if, except we can do something else with it. Just like when we were looking at that clauses, we can use this it is construction right here. Just like we looked at before, it is plus an adjective. Right? And we can do that to avoid having to mention a human subject. So let's take a look at how that works. We have form 1. We can have it is plus a negative adjective. Now that can take two forms. That can mean the adjective itself is negative, or it can mean that we negate the adjective, just like we see up here. Let's see here. We are not sure. So we have a negative adjective predicate. It could be that right here. It could be a negative adjective predicate, or it could be an adjective that's just negative. And then we end up with whether or not plus a sentence. That's pretty common. The second form is it is plus negative adjective, just like we were looking at here, plus whether or if, choose one or the other, plus a sentence, and then or not at the end of it. So let's take a look at what that means. Here we go. It is unclear. Now this right here is a negative adjective. It's got the un in front of it, and that makes it negative. It is unclear. Now we get the whether or not. Whether or not, okay, and now we have a sentence. Whether or not punishment is the best way to deter plagiarism in papers. All we're saying right here is we don't know if this really is the best way to do this. And notice we've gotten rid of any human subject here. I could say people do not know. Yeah, except which people? Who are we talking about, right? By saying this, it is, we've eliminated all the human subjects, and we're really just focusing in on this idea, which is kind of cool. Here's another one. It is not entirely clear. Okay, here we go. Now we've got not clear. All right, that's what we were talking about previously. So I could have a negative adjective like unclear, or I could say not clear. There we go. It is not entirely clear whether such a strategy would actually work to bring the result that it purports to guarantee. Okay, once again, we've got our whether, and we've got the rest of the sentence here. If I want to, I can put or not at the end. I don't have to. All right, and that's how it works. We're just calling into question this idea. We're saying we're not sure about it. Now, here's a nifty little trick. Using a that clause plus a whether clause for a hook. And in case you're not familiar with it, when you're starting off a paper, we usually begin with an introduction. And the very first part of an introduction is a hook, some sort of statement that's supposed to catch the reader's interest, to get them focusing on things. There's a couple of different types of hooks. One of the simplest ones that you can use, and the most effective too in many cases, is to take a commonly held belief and then put it into question. So here's an example of how that looks. Actually, let's back up for a second. If you're thinking about that, a commonly held belief, something that everybody believes, well, we can use a that clause to talk about that. Just like we looked at earlier, we could say, it is believed that, or it is clear that, whatever the case might be. Okay, there we're stating a fact. And then we could use a whether clause, because that talks about calling something into question, doubting it, right? So here's an example of it. All right, let's read through here. It is commonly thought that the best strategy for learning a language is to spend a great deal of time talking to native speakers, of the language in question and studying its grammar and vocabulary. All right, so here's the subject, right? It is, and then we get commonly thought. So what we have there is a verb in the passive voice. It is commonly thought, right? Now we have our that, okay? And now we have the sentence that comes after it, right? The best strategy for learning a language, the best way to learn a language, spend a bunch of time talking to native speakers and learn the grammar and vocabulary. Okay, well, that's fairly obvious. I think most of us can agree with that. All right, now our very next sentence. We start with, however, recently, many advertisements on the internet, all right, there's our subject, many advertisements on the internet, have questioned whether a great deal of time is actually necessary to learn another language. All right, so we have this question, just like we looked at before, and then we get our whether. And this whole idea of a great deal of time is actually necessary to learn another language. So basically what we're saying here is, yeah, everybody thinks that, you know, if you're going to learn another language, you got to spend a bunch of time talking to native speakers, you learn the grammar, you learn the vocabulary. However, recently other people have questioned that. Well, recently some people have been saying, I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, so that's a pretty good hook. That's getting your attention into whatever the rest of the paper is going to talk about, which is most likely going to be something about whether or not we need to spend a lot of time learning language. It establishes a topic there. Okay, so that's your basic types of noun clauses. Let's come down here and take a look at something else. Now, I'm going to show you something. These are two paragraphs that were taken from an actual paper that was turned in at the University of Michigan. This comes from the Michigan Corpus website. So these are two actual paragraphs written by a native speaker of English on a paper that got a passing grade in class. What I want you to do is take a look here. Here's both of them. I'd like you to see if you can find the noun clauses in here. So right now I encourage you to pause the video and take a look and see if you can find the actual noun clauses in here. So please go ahead and press pause. All right, hopefully you pressed pause and now you have some idea where the noun clauses actually were inside these paragraphs. Let's take a look through together. So we get, okay, we're talking about an academic article about school choice or privatization, second chance for schools. So we're talking about schools, something about that, right? All right, and we go and we're seeing all this stuff. I don't see any noun clauses so far. Let's start here. Carnoy uses other researchers' studies and quantitative facts in education for various population of students to argue that, whoa, hey, here we go, argue. All right, we're arguing right here. Arguing, that's similar to the word say or state. And immediately after it, look at this. We have that. And that's exactly what we have going on here. Here is our first noun clause. Says that we've used this to argue that school choice has no net positive impact, blah, 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 just like that. Now we come down and we say, okay, contrastingly, Lips argues that, well, here's that same verb, argue, right? And we've got argues here, matching for the subject, right? And the same thing, we've got that right after it, followed by this whole noun clause. There we go. So that's two in this first paragraph. Let's take a look at the second one. Use of international data makes this even more persuasive. Nope, nothing so far. All right. Chilean studies show that, show. That's similar to demonstrate or prove. It's one of those four verbs that I showed you earlier, right? So, if we get this, Chilean studies show that, and there we go. Here's another that, showing us another noun clause. And so this whole thing right here is our next noun clause. Okay. Let's take a look further on here. While policies in the U.S. may differ, data from other nations showing increased stratification of students after the budget show that, whoa, hold up. Look at this. This whole thing right here, this is not a noun clause. This whole thing is actually a noun phrase. So this is the subject. But then let's look what happens after it. Show. Okay, so we have here a subject, and then we have show, just like we looked at before. Show, demonstrate, prove. And here is our last noun clause. So all told, we have 4 noun clauses inside these paragraphs. Let's take a look at them in a bit more detail. And we're going to do something here that I like to call emulation. What I want to do is take a look at each of these noun clauses individually. And I want to show you a technique that you can use to take a look at native speakers' writings and then use them to help your own. So, here was that first noun clause that we found. Carnoy uses other researchers' studies and quantitative analyses, blah, 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 blah. We see all this stuff. Okay, well, is this really helpful to you right now? Probably not. However, if you break it apart piece by piece grammatically, you can actually create for yourself a bit of a shell. And what you can do with this shell is then replace the various pieces with content that you want to use in your paper. So here's how we can do that. One thing that we do to start off with is we get rid of the subject. We just put a blank in there. So I can say, boom, there we go. Someone uses, and I see we're talking about some sort of evidence, right? Okay, so it goes, other researchers' studies and quantitative analyses for various populations of students to argue that, okay, it looks like we've got this. So-and-so uses something to argue that something else, right? So what I'm going to do is take this whole part, and I'm going to just put a blank in there. There we go. Uses something to argue that, and then we have our whole noun clause at the end here, right? And we end up with that. And lo and behold, this is exactly what I had done before, right here. Now, we just need to know what we're going to replace this with, right? Right here we had a subject. Now we have uses, and we had some sort of information here, some data, some statistics, whatever it might be. And then we have to argue that and whatever point we're trying to make here, right? So we can replace that with other things. Let's say I want to write a psychology paper, right? All right, I'll take a famous psychologist. Let's say Freud. All right, here we go. Freud uses, and I just need some sort of data right here. Well, Freud was famous for talking about dreams, right? Okay. Well, let's see here. He was looking at what was inside of dreams, what people thought, all that kind of stuff. So let's say something like that. Freud uses the content of dreams. Okay, there we go. Uses the content of dreams to argue that, okay, now I can say whatever point I want to make here. Let's see here. Here we go. Freud uses the content of dreams to argue that humans have secret emotions that they do not share with others. What I've done is I've just taken that sentence that used a noun clause earlier, I've replaced these blanks with my own thoughts. And now it's my own sentence, and that's cool. We can do that. Anytime you see a good sentence in someone else's paper, there's no rule against copying the grammar. Copying grammar is okay. Copying thoughts, not so much. All right. Let's take a look at the next one. Contrastingly, Lips argues that school choice is a sign of progress towards providing blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'd like to ask you right now to pause the video and on your own decide what parts of this you can remove and then replace with your own thoughts. So please press pause and think about that now. All right. Hopefully you pressed pause and you thought about what parts you could remove and what parts you could keep, right? Now, there's different ways of doing this. We could remove a lot, we could remove a little. Here's one way of doing it. This is what I came up with. I can say, contrastingly, so-and-so argues that, and then we can have a main point right here. Now, I kept this contrastingly because I'm going to use this if I'm comparing two different opinions, two different viewpoints. This would be really useful in a compare and contrast paper. So all I'm going to do is establish who I'm talking about here, right? I was just talking about Freud. Okay, well, Freud was a contemporary of Carl Jung, so let's put Jung in there. All right. Contrastingly, Jung argues that, and I can put whatever I want right here. I'm going to put something weird in just because I like Carl Jung and I like Freud. All right, so what I just said here is archetypes are more significant than emotion. Great, so I'm basically contrasting Jung with Freud. We've gone from talking about schools to talking about psychology right here. Same form of the sentences, but completely different content. All right, now let's take a look at another one. Same deal. Chilean studies show that blah, 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 blah. Again, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and on your own decide what parts you can remove and replace with your own thoughts. So please, press pause right now. All right, hopefully you pressed pause and you came up with your own ideas of what you wanted to do here. Here's what I came up with. Okay, and this is pretty simple, right? This is something that you could use in many different types of papers. Notice we cut out most of the words in here because they're all the content. All right, what I've done is I've kept the word studies, right? And I can replace this with just about anything else I want. Chilean was the word here, so that was an adjective. So I need some sort of adjective or adjective phrase in front of the noun. Let's see what we can do with that. Let's see here. Okay, several recent studies. Great, that works. Show that, and here's going to be my main point. Right? Several recent studies show that, once again, since we're using all these that's, and notice, like I said before, this is the most common type of noun clause in academic writing. The reason is it's so easy to use. We can put any type of sentence we want after this, right? Okay, well, I'm going to toss something else in here. Several recent studies show that although students do not like homework, they feel strange if there is none. Great. All right, I've just replaced the content completely with my own thought, and it still works. And here's the sentence. I have this subordinate clause, right? Although students do not like homework. And then I have an independent clause after it. They feel strange if there is none. Great. Now we're down to the last one. Okay. This is a bit of a longer one, and I want to challenge you with this one. Same deal. I want you to pause the video and see what parts you can cut out and what parts you can keep. But this time, I want you to make it a little bit more complicated. I want you to keep as much as possible of this particular sentence. Keep as much as you can. Don't throw too much away, and see what you can come up with. So please press pause right now and try to do that on your own. All right, hopefully you pressed pause and you decided to look at what parts you could cut out while still keeping as much as possible. Well, here's what I came up with. All right. While, now we have this subordinate clause to start off with. So it has to be something that contrasts with what comes next, right? Data from, all right, so we're talking about some sort of information. This is going to be very limited in its usage, right? We're going to have to talk about data from a country or a research organization or a field, particular subject that we're studying, right? Showing, and again, we're going to have to talk about a specific point that it's showing right here, and then show that, and here's going to be our main idea that comes out of it, right? Okay, so let's try doing this piece by piece. This is going to be kind of tough, all right? Let's see here. I can start with that. While many people think that homework is good, data from, all right, I'm just going to pick a country at random right here. Sweden, because what the heck, why not Sweden, you know? So data from Sweden showing, okay, now I have to say what it's talking about right here, right? Showing the effects of various educational interventions. So that's basically what it was talking about. Educational interventions, ways that we can go in and help people learn, right? Data from Sweden showing the effects of various educational interventions, all right, show that, all right, what are they going to show? I'm going to say something about how homework is evil. Homework does not actually benefit students in the long run. And there we go. Again, what we have here is a sentence that's completely different from what we had above. And yet, we've managed to keep pretty much the same grammar. Now, the reason that we've just been looking at this sort of activity right now is because you can do this on your own. It's going to be quite easy to do. If you go to a website like the Michigan Corpus website, you can pick actual academic papers, look at their sentences, and basically just take pieces of their sentences, remove them, and replace them with your own ideas. All right. Last item of business, ladies and gentlemen. Let's come down here. Common mistakes and editing. Because when we use noun clauses, especially if we're not native speakers of English, we oftentimes make certain mistakes. Here's one of the most common ones. Everyone says. Okay? This is a fairly common thing that you see. Everyone says that, everyone thinks that, everyone believes that. All right, we looked at that earlier. Well, here's two examples. Everyone knows that stealing is bad because it hurts other people. Here's another one. We all know that doing a good job is very important. The problem with these isn't the grammar. The grammar's fine. The problem is word choice. I can't say everyone knows. Instead of that, it's great if we can replace it with an it is construction, just like from earlier. Now, if you remember, we'll have something like it is plus an adjective or a passive verb, and then we'd have the that, just like everything else. So basically, I can keep the whole back part of this sentence. I just need to change this part. Let's try that. It is widely believed. There we go. So we have a verb in the passive voice here. It is widely believed that stealing is bad because it hurts other people. Great. Now we've gotten rid of the everyone. Let's look down here. We all know that doing a good job is very important. All right, this time I'm going to ask you to try to fix it. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure out a way to fix this. All right, hopefully you paused the video and you gave it a shot. Well, let's see what we can do with this. Instead of we all know, here's one thing that we could do. It is known that. Okay, that works. It sounds a little bit strange, but you know what? It's okay. Here's another thing we can do. It is widely understood that. These are a couple of different ways that we can fix those mistakes right there. This is a very common one. Remember, try to avoid saying we all know, everybody knows, as we all know. Instead, we can use this type of construction. All right, let's take a look at a few more. Aha, that weather. What's wrong with that? Well, let's find out. Many people are not sure that whether this is a good idea or not. What's the problem right here? Pretty simple. We have two things together, that and whether. We can't put a WH word together with that. It doesn't work. We have to choose one or the other. That's why they're listed as different types. You can't use them both together. So we have to pick one or the other. Well, let's see what's going to happen here. Many people are not sure that this is a good idea or not. Whoops, I see this or not right here, right? Well, that means I can't use that. Boom. Many people are not sure whether this is a good idea or not. And that looks a lot better. Okay, cool. Next item of business, here's this sentence. After they did all the research, the scientists decided that what they needed to do. All right, you need to guess right now. What's it going to be? Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can fix it. All right, hopefully you just paused the video and tried to fix this sentence. Let's take a look at what we need to do. Once again, same problem. We've got that, what. Okay, now let's see if we can figure out which one of these works better. Hopefully you decided that it would be what, but I'll show you why. If we say that, we say the scientists decided that, after that we need to have a full sentence. That means subject, verb, object, all the required parts of the sentence. After what, we only need a clause. Now look at this. They needed to do. Whoops, we're missing an object right here, right? And that's what this what is replacing. And that's why we need to just say this. After they did all the research, the scientists decided what they needed to do. Aha. Let's take a look at some more. What do, where do, etc. I wonder what that's about. Okay. Let's take a look here. Since there is an overabundance of information available about every imaginable topic on the internet, students often cannot decide what should they trust and what should they not. What's the issue here? I don't really see too much of a big deal. The only issue here, ladies and gentlemen, is order. If we take a look at the noun clauses that are being used right here, students often cannot decide what should they trust. What should they trust? If we look at that right there, what should they trust? Well, that sounds like a question, doesn't it? In a question, we'd have our WH word, and then we'd have whatever auxiliary we've got, and then the subject, and then the verb. That's not how it works with a noun clause. In a noun clause, instead, we just need to make it a normal clause. what they should trust, and what should they not? Nope. What they should not. All right, last example here, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead and hit pause on the video and see if you can fix this. Okay, hopefully you hit pause and you tried to fix this sentence right here. Although the winter break will be fairly long, many students are not sure where can they go for a vacation. Aha, well, same issue. We've got this auxiliary verb right here. I'm just going to delete it from there. Where they can go for a vacation. Right there we've just switched from having can after where to having it come after the subject, they. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have to say about noun clauses right here. Thank you for sticking with it through the video. I hope it's been helpful.